Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh and good morning. Today we will present about elaborate the difference between the practice of separation of power in Malaysia and the USA. Before that, I will introduce myself and our members. My name is Azam Hasbi, this is my friend Kamal Bakri bin Kamri, and this one Sharifuddin bin Amiruddin, and the last one Nur Shahira binti Yahya. What is the meaning of separation of power? Separation of power refers to division of state government into branches, each with separate independent power and responsibilities. Uh, Separation of power refers to division of government responsibilities into distinct branch in order to prevent one branch from performing the core function of another. That means the goal of separation of power is to prevent power concentration and to provide checks and balance. Separation of power division of the legislative, executive, and judicial function of government among separate and independent bodies. Example, Malaysia and the United States of America (USA). Despite difference in the political system and constitution, are known to support the concept of constitutionalism as well the doctrine of separation of power. Given the importance of adhering to this doctrine within the framework a limited government as adopted by Malaysia and the United States, it's worthwhile to examine the expressions of both countries in applying the principle. That's it for me. I pass the part to Sherry.
Have you ever wondered who has the authority to make laws or punish people who break them? Hi, I'm Sharifuddin and I will try to explain the separation of powers known as SOP in these two countries, which is Malaysia and USA. SOP has three branches that have been described in the Constitution, which is a legislative, executive, and judicial. Malaysia legislative branches is one of machinery in the practice of democratic government creates the law in the country. This legislative body is the one who manage or in charge to make the law and policy. The National Legislative Council, or known as the Malaysian Parliament, is legislative power in the government. It divided into two houses. First, Dewan Negara, or well known as House of Senate. It has 70 members of senators in these executive branches. Secondly, Dewan Rakyat, or we know it as House of Representatives. It has 222 members of representative in this executive branch. Making law is a primary function of the legislative branches to design and implement policy, rules, and regulation. Legislative body has a power to pass or make the law. It is an organization that has the authority for the law that they had created. It is an authority for a legislative body to make laws or political units. Next is executive. Executive power is the vested in the cabinet led by the Prime Minister of Malaysia. This is part of the government practicing authority in and holding the responsibility regarding the administration of the state. Executive power are exercised by the federal government and 13 state governments. This is type of government system that determine the direction and the direction of the country progress in the future. The executive power are designed to implement policy, rules, and regulation and to maintain the concept of SOP. In political system depend on the separation of powers. Authority is conveyed among a few branches which is legislative, executive, and judicial as an endeavor to forestall the converse of power in the hands of individual. This is the executive consists the conference of rules. First, Yang di-Pertuan Agong, known as YDPA. Secondly, the Prime Minister, Cabinet, and the Public Service. Lastly, the judicial. The judicial branches in Malaysia, which includes the Supreme Court, or the all the nation federal and state courts. The judiciary court interprets and applies the law in the name of sovereign or a state. It applies into to fact of each cases to provide the mechanism of the resolution of debate. In Malaysia, the hierarchy of courts begin with the magistrate court, session court, high court, court of appeal, and the federal court, which is the superior courts amongst then others. They also had a special court is used to hear cases brought by all against all royalty. For example, there is a parallel system of state Sharia law which has limited jurisdiction over matters of state Islamic law. The judiciary is fully independent because the courts have the power to proclaim any government rules, either federal or state, as not legitimate. So, for the next separation of power is from USA. When the new constitution was adopted in 1787, the structure of the infant government of the limited United States called for the three separate branches. It also same as Malaysia, but powers and system check and balance are different. Fashion, the national government of USA divided into two separate parts of branches, which is legislative, executive, and judicial. Legislative, better known as the Congress, makes the law in their country. This is also described in Article 1 of the US Constitution. Many people feel that the founding fathers this put branch document in first as they thought this is important. Legislative branch also responsible for approving federal judges and justice, passing the national budget and declaring war. In the US, this branch is comprised of all the courts and in the land, from federal district courts to the US Supreme Court. This also makes them to decide whether to accept many presidential appointments and conduct detailed investigation. The legislative branch is comprised of 100 US senators in House of Senate and 435 members in the US House of Representatives. Each state gets 2 senators and some of representatives depending on how many people living in the state. Next, the executive branch, well known as the president. Executive branch needs to administer and implement law and policy. Executive body can execute the laws and or accept the policy. Executive branch can check the power of legislature in the following ways such as the leader of this branch of government are the president and vice president. President can veto Congress laws so that they don't go into effect. The president also can call Congress into a special session, but he can make them pass the new laws. They had a responsible for enforcing the laws that Congress set for them with some help from group of advisors, that known as a cabinet. The executive branch acted within a month of Supreme Court decided establishing a government-funded national database of medal citation phased in over time to enable verification of military honor. This also appointed helpers assist the president in making important decisions within their area of expertise. Last but not least, the judicial, well known as the court. The court will settle disputes arising under the Constitution and laws of the USA. Here's what judicial can do. The judicial branches can check the legislature by declaring it unconstitutional. This branch is comprised of all the courts in the land of federal district to Supreme Courts. These courts interpret the nation laws and punish everyone who breaks them. The courts also issues warrants in the federal crime cases as again proceeds over impeachment trials in the Senate. The highest court, U.S. Supreme Court, settles disputes among states, hears appeals from state and federal courts, and determines if federal laws are constitutional. So, By knowing these three branches in these two countries, who runs them and how they work together, you can involve, inform, and be intelligent. Now that brings us to the end of my presentation. I would like to switch this presentation to my fellow friends. Here we go.
Hi, my name is Kamaru Bakri bin Kamri. Today, I want to talk about the practical of separation of power in Malaysia and USA. The separation of power in Malaysia and USA have three differences. Firstly, different legislative, okay, different legislative. In Malaysia, the legislative is recognized as the parliament. Secondly, Malaysia there are Dewan Negara and Dewan Rakyat. Thirdly, the separation of power concept is named as fusion of power concept. And the last of the Malaysia, only the judicial branch are independent from the executive and legislative branches, while the two are experience a power merger. Meanwhile, in USA, the legislative is called as the Congress. After that, USA, there are House of Senate and House of Representative. The concept of separation of power was introduced by Montesquieu, and lastly, division of power declared that the three government branches should each have a distinct share of the state or the government power. And now, I want to talk about the different executive Malaysia. First, in the Prime Minister Cabinet, but there must be members of the lower house of parliament who, in the Yang di-Pertuan Agong opinion, hold a majority in parliament. The Prime Minister serves as the head of the executive branch of the government, which is the composed of the cabinet various ministers. It creates numerous socio-economic policy and development programs to help the country grow. And the cabinet report to both chamber of parliament and is chosen from their rank. Meanwhile, the different executive in USA first vest in the President of the United States who act both as the country head of state and the government commander-in-chief. The vice president is a member of the executive branch and is ready to take over as president when need. The daily enforcement and administration of federal law is the responsibility of the cabinet and independent federal agency. Lastly, the president selects the leader for all federal agencies, including the cabinet, to carry out and execute the legislation passed by Congress. And different number three is different judicial in Malaysia. Through many justice government sympathizers, the judiciary and ostensibly separate from the executive and the legislative. The Federal Court, the Court of Appeal, and two High Court, one for Peninsular Malaysia and one for East Malaysia, are the other top court in the court system. In 1993, special court was established to hear cases brought by or against the ruler. Before the establishment, rules were immune from any legal action taken in their personal capacity. And lastly, the Yang di-Pertuan Agong, the select monarch, and the head of state of Malaysia, components that are indeed the ruler. Meanwhile, the different judicial in USA: first, district court, which serve as the court; the circuit court system, which is the first level of appeal; and the Supreme Court of the United States, which the ultimate level of appeal in the federal system, are the three primary levels of the federal court system. Okay? In many ways, federal court operate differently from state court. The type of case that can be heard in the federal system are indeed in main destination from civil lawsuit or criminal proceedings. Third, any case arising under federal statutes, the Constitution, or treaties should be brought in the federal district court. Original jurisdiction in the term used to refer to this type of attorney. Lastly, sometimes federal and state court respective areas of authority will overlap, allowing certain issues to be filed before other court. That's all for me. Thank you.
I will explain about characteristic. Separation of power is a constitutional law doctrine that maintains the separation of the three branches of government: executive, legislative, and judicial. This is also known as the check and balance system because each branch is given specific power in order to check and balance the other branches. Thus, separation of power refers to the division of government responsibility into distinct branches in order to prevent one branch from performing the core function of another. The goal is to prevent power concentration and to provide check and balance. Aside from that, the legislative branch is in charge of enacting state law and appropriating funds to run the government. The executive branch is in charge of implementing and administering public policy that has been enacted and funded by the legislative branch. The judicial branch is in charge of interpreting the Constitution and law and applying the interpretation to the parts brought before it. That's all for me.
Conclusion. In conclusion, the separation of power in Malaysia and the United States can be seen from various perspectives. The separation of power is essential in a democracy to avoid tyrannical rule and abuse of power, so that all countries can accept the separation of power in their respective countries. His separation of power is a principle that is designed to prevent the concentration of power in any one branch of government. In both Malaysia and the United States, this principle is reflected in the structure of the government, which are divided into three branches: the executive, legislative, and judicial. However, there are some difference in the way that separation of power is practiced in Malaysia and United States. That's all from us. Thank you.